Welcome to the Flicks Forum podcast, where each episode we go back and we look at a Netflix original film in the order of release. Today, we've got Netflix 114th film. It's the 2018 period horror Apostle. It's directed by Gareth Evans. It stars Dan Stevens, Lucy Boynton, Mark Lewis-Jones, Bill Milner, Kristine Froseth, Paul Higgins, and Michael Sheen. I'm Jesse, and I have MJ here with me. How are you?
I'm good, mate. How are you?
Good. Good to, I guess we're in October and we mentioned this last week. We've got a bit of a horror film to tie us in towards Halloween, the festive season of the ghouls and the gremlins and the whatever they are.
We don't really celebrate Halloween in Australia, but I've been thinking about this a lot. There's a house in my street that's fully decked out with Halloween stuff, and I'm all for it. I think it's definitely not a holiday. That's probably the wrong word. It's an occasion that I could definitely get behind. And I think Australia's sort of been building towards Halloween a lot more. And I think I'm keen to sort of get really heavy into the Halloween stuff because it is right up my alley.
Yeah, I like this time of year where there's a lot of people that do like a October sort of thrill month where they watch a lot of horror films or scary films, a movie a day in the lead up to the 31st of October. So yeah, it's good for us to be able to do this one, I guess, around this time. And yeah.
Yeah, no, well said.
I don't have much else to say on that. So we start our show off with our fast flicks where we do a quick summary of the film. So what's your fast flicks for Apostle?
All right, so it's set in the early 1900s. A man must secretly infiltrate a secluded and kooky community to rescue his kidnapped sister, completely unawares of what lies ahead of him on this island.
Oh, I like the openness to work out what's on this island. I've taken what you've said, but I've just done it very bluntly. I've just said a man tries to find his sister who's been taken by a religious cult.
That's it. That's what happens.
Yeah, so that's where we're heading towards with this episode. So I'm going to put it out there early that we're probably going to spoil this film quite early on with what we speak about. So if you did want to check out Apostle and have little context going into what actually happens in this film, give us a pause because we're going to head into this part where we talk about how the film was made and what the film's about. So MJ, what can you fill us in?
Yeah, all right. So it was November 2, 2016 when it was first announced that Gareth Evans working on a new project that he was planning to write and direct. And at that time, Dan Stevens was already confirmed to be cast in the lead role. So probably about 6 months later, the film was actually picked up by Netflix. And Netflix basically funded this from the get-go. So Gareth Evans and his producer and XYZ Films basically started working on this script. They put this idea together. They worked on storylines and beats and everything. And they took that entire package to Netflix and said, this is the film that we want to make. These are the mood boards. This is the vision. And basically Netflix jumped on board and got right behind it. And to be honest, I think they were pretty unsure whether this film would have gotten made if it wasn't for Netflix. So, again, coming in to save the day for a film that probably wasn't going to hit our cinemas at all. And all of a sudden it gets to international streaming platforms. So very grateful for that process. They're obviously very creatively supportive as we do see a lot from a lot of the films we talk about on this podcast. And basically this was the first time Gareth Evans worked outside of his own company. So he'd been working for his own company with basically him and his wife being the boss of things. So it was his first time out of that environment, and he really enjoyed the collaborative nature of Netflix without them really standing on his toes and making it work. So well done to Netflix for making this film possible in the first place. So that all happened. And then it was April 2017. So not long after Netflix came on board, the film was basically, the filming started. It was largely shot on a set that was built in Magrum Park in Neath Port Talbot in Wales, Gareth Evans being a Welsh director. And that was it. So they built this set. I think the set took about 6 weeks to build, which if you see the film, it makes perfect sense. It's a pretty elaborate set. And from what I can gather, they built all those houses, all those huts and everything. And then the film premiered at Fantastic Fest, which is a film festival in Texas, in September 2018. And then it began streaming on Netflix on the 12th of October 2018. So a month after it was premiered at the Fantastic Fest Film Festival. So there's a few more bits and pieces that I'm sure you'll talk about, but that's kind of the pretty succinct and nice story of how it got to our screens.
Yeah, that was really nice. I thoroughly enjoyed that. I guess the narrative wise, I haven't got an awful lot for this one, but there's a couple little stories about the film that I thought was cool to see, and this is probably why I started off with that spoiler mention before, because the ending is something we're probably going to talk about at various stages throughout this, but the ending was meant to be a lot darker originally, and the director had this sort of idea about Thomas making this decision about life and not wanting it to continue like it does in the end. So I thought that obviously there's a little bit of context behind the storytelling elements of this and where it actually ends. So we'll get to that towards the end, but I thought that was a cool little thing to see, that I'm happy to talk about the ending and how it did change.
I'm intrigued. I'm looking forward to picking your brain on that more, because this is all news to me. So that's going to be, let's put a pin in that.
Yeah, I read there was an interview with Gareth Evans, and there was a few things in there which I thought were quite cool that he sort of spoke about. The other one was this conversation on Reddit that I saw. There's a Reddit thread on this film. This is really got nothing to do with the film. I just thought this was hilarious. So I just thought I'd talk about this conversation that I saw on Reddit about the film. And obviously, if you haven't seen the film, you're not going to get it. But if you have, so there's this one person who's posted and said, "This movie was disgusting. A girl came over to Netflix and chill, and I had no idea it would have so much gore and monsters. A human wine corker is not an aphrodisiac." And I was like, oh yeah, that's not bad. So the next person comments and goes, "You watched this during a Netflix and chill? Bold strategy." And another character gets online and says, "I can't, haha, human wine corker. Why is that so accurate? She probably thought you were going to murder her." And then the final comment on this thread was, "So you didn't get to cork her?" I just thought that was a great little comedic look at some of the key scenes in this film. So that was that made me laugh.
Yeah, well, it's nice to look at them in a comedic way, because when you're watching them, you certainly don't look at them in a comedic way.
No, not at all. The only I had a look at the translations for this title. It's a one-word title, so apostle is pretty easy to translate. In Japanese, though, they did translate it to apostle, law of revenge. So they put in this which I think is an interesting take, a little bit of an interesting take on it. Yeah, I guess it was also nominated for a couple of awards. Had 8 nominations, had a win at the Wales version of the BAFTAs. It actually won for best makeup and hair, which is a nice little nod.
Fair enough too.
Yeah. Apart from that, I haven't got much else about this one. What else have you got?
No, look, that's about it. Also nominated for some awards at the Fright Meter Awards and the Fangoria Chainsaw Awards and Catalonian International Film Festival. So it did a few rounds with film festivals, which is nice to see, which we don't always see with Netflix films. You can really tell the films that Netflix think are cut above, and some that they just want to live on their streaming service so people can just watch and not think too critically about. But this is obviously one that they got behind a little bit.
Yeah, I had a percentage match for this one. Which
I didn't.
You didn't. I had it at 59%, which is very, very low.
A lot of yours are low, Jesse. I know I talk about this a lot. Yeah. I feel like you must be scathing with your thumbs up, thumbs down. And they're like, "What is this guy like?"
They can't work me out. So hopefully we might see some higher ones coming up in the future. But we can lead into the consensus, I guess, not necessarily mine. But what are the critics and the audience saying for this one?
I have to say, if I'm Netflix, I'm giving this movie a big tick. I obviously don't know. We aren't disclosed the information of how much they paid for it and how much they spent on it. But it's a 6.3 out of 10 on IMDb, which is good, which is without being amazing, but it's a good score. But it's over 41,000 ratings on IMDb, which is a great amount of people who have seen this film and wanted to rate it. And then it's a 3.1 out of 5 on Letterboxd, which is, more or less the same score as the IMDb, and that's nearly 35,000 ratings on Letterboxd. So decent ratings. You'd say it's above par. You'd say it's a good rating and good numbers too. So I think it's ticking a lot of boxes for Netflix.
Yeah, I agree. A lot of high numbers, and Google users had it at 73%. So sort of around that ballpark. Rotten Tomatoes, the critics, it had 68 reviews. So again, on the higher end for some of these films that we have covered, and certified fresh on 78% for the critics. The audience had it a lot lower though. The audience had it at 53%. And that was on nearly 1,300 audience reviews, which is quite a bit for Rotten Tomatoes. We often see very minimal numbers on Rotten Tomatoes of the audience. So that gives us a little bit of context heading into our discussion on this one, where we'll kick off with our early thoughts and have a quick brief chat about what our thoughts are. So MJ, what are you thinking?
I'm looking forward to talking about this movie. I still kind of don't know how much I actually liked it. Like, there was a certain eeriness and intrigue to the story that had me pretty pumped, which is right up down my alley. Like, I'm all into that kind of horror stuff, and even the supernatural horror stuff. But it really took off in its own direction in that final act, and the graphicness and that brutality, it threw me a bit. I can be on board with that in a film. I got no problem with it. Although I just think I was a little bit underwhelmed with how it came to a close from a story perspective. I think I expected a little bit more of a payoff from this kind of godly supernatural perspective that they'd set up. And I think that's where I'm underwhelmed. I don't care that there was a bit of torture porn to it. That's part of movie making these days, and it's niche for some, but I've got no issue with it. But look, it's fair to say it certainly grabs your attention, and I thought the film was really well shot. I think Gareth Evans. This is the first Gareth Evans film I've seen. I think he's done a really good job with it. I think you can tell it's a big passion project of his. I'm kind of like, yeah, I didn't mind it, but I don't know how much I did like it. So I'm looking forward to talking about it.
Yeah, I thought this one was right up, like you mentioned, right up your cup of tea. Like I was like, this is an MJ film, and I got to the end of this one. I was like, cool. I'm gonna have heaps to like dissect and pull apart in this, and then I thought about it, and I'm like, realistically, I don't think it really does. Like, it's got some clear, strong ideas and like very easy to understand sort of ideas. But I think I was expecting there's a little bit more under there. But I don't think there is. But maybe you might enlighten me a bit. But I don't think that.
No, I think you're right. Yeah, I don't think there's much under the hood.
I don't think you have to look too much further into it. But it was an enjoyable ride. Like it was still enjoyable. So
definitely a ride. That's a good way to put it.
Yeah, I don't know. Maybe I was just expectations versus reality. Like you go into a film and they set it off with the location and the time period and things like that, and brings up memories of like The Witch and
which
like,
is good.
okay, cool. This is going to have heaps to sort of pull apart. There's going to be so many visual examples that you can pull upon, and then we'll get into this very, very soon, I'm sure.
Well, I think you're thinking the same line as me, because they set it up so perfectly for what I was hoping to be a really interesting payoff. And instead of the final act being not so much a reveal, but more that satisfying conclusion to all these little bits and pieces that you're slowly putting together about the story, instead of doing that, they just went for like full gore and full graphicness, and that and which I don't care, it didn't bother me, but that left me unfulfilled. That's kind of where I see. I think you're kind of saying the same thing.
Yeah, I think so too. Yeah. Okay. Well, let's look at some characters from this one to see if we can identify what they were trying to say. So, start us off.
Yeah. So Thomas Richardson is our main protagonist, played by Dan Stevens. So, as a character, he's got this mean streak to him, right? And he's been punished by his religion in the past, and he's justifiably skeptical of faith in general. And obviously he's coming into this cult that has a different sort of faith to it. He's also got this air of mystery around him. And whilst, again, I don't feel like I got too much of a payoff around that, it helped to maintain my interest in the main protagonist and therefore in the story for the whole film. So despite his dominance on screen and his general likability from an audience perspective, there's nothing really else that stands out about him for me. I didn't know what else to talk about him apart from what I just said, even though I kind of liked him and he kind of kept me intrigued.
Yeah, I agree. And looking back on it, I was like, I'm going to try and pull this film apart through him as he's that main. This story is his journey, and the idea of this film all revolves around this. He's lost his faith, and now it's him trying to regain that faith. And they do it very explicitly at the start through this scene where he's being told about needing to find his sister, and there's words on the wall. I think it's like the power of his resurrection lies in the touch of his suffering. So they set it up that this guy needs to be reborn or reconnect with some kind of faith or some kind of belief in, and it doesn't necessarily have to be a religious belief, but that belief in humanity and that belief in freedom and what people are like. So I think that I feel like I agree with you. I feel like that they it was a very slow sort of reveal of this scene, which was really good, where you find out about how he was preaching in across the Asian continent, things like that. And I think that was really powerful in showing why he's sort of lost this ability to believe. But I feel like they chucked that in the middle, and it was a little bit too late when we've already seen so much of him. So yeah, I think I don't have much. I was sort of scrambling because you said what you wanted to say.
Yeah, and again, that's not a bad thing, right? That they just put all their cards out and go, this is the character, right? There's obviously this backstory to him. All right, we're going to fill you in with the backstory, and there's just not that much more to him, and that's okay. That's okay. Yeah. I just for a guy who dominates the screen, I expected to take more out of him, and I probably didn't, even though I kind of liked him. So
good. All right, who have you got next?
I got Malcolm Howe, played by Michael Sheen. So he was the leader of the cult, I guess you could say, and he was somewhat ambiguous in his motivations, which I appreciated. He never really felt like he was the villain of the story, despite the fact that he was wearing these villain shoes, right? He was fitting the mold of what a villain in a movie was. And I enjoy that his dedication to his God, whatever you want to call her, and even his thirst for his own power, it was kind of born out of sincerity and necessity, despite the fact that he was too consumed to see that it was kind of time to jump ship, and he never really he made wrong decisions. But I just don't think he failed for the wrong reasons. I don't think he was a bad dude. And I think there's a level of him completely losing his grip when that desperation to keep order was slipping away. But his intentions aren't to be like this all-conquering, all-powerful leader. And I think that makes him an interesting villainous character. Who was he good? Was he bad? You kind of kept guessing most of the time, which I think it worked.
Yeah, I literally just have down here, he's like the switch character. They set him up that they want you to think he's that villain the whole time, like you mentioned, and obviously you realize that his care for the community, he realistically just wants them to do well. So he may be lost a little bit in his way in doing that. But yeah, I've got nothing like more to say really to that, because yeah, to me he was just that, to try and get the audience on board, saying he's the bad guy, he's the one we've got to fear when you have this switch, and that was him.
And they leave it open, right? There's never anything that he does that you're like, he is a bad guy. So they do leave it open, which works as well.
Yeah. Who have you got next?
I got Jeremy, played by Bill Milner. So this bloke just didn't fit in this community. And considering you don't get much of an insight into the rest of the villages, it kind of makes me wonder what they're all doing there. So I'm a little confused how he got to this place. I think I might have missed it somewhere, because it's obviously something to do with Frank, because he saw this like, oh, my boy, don't kill the boy. Or I don't think it's his son, but I think there's a link there that I missed.
I thought it was his son. That's why I had it down. I thought it was his son, but maybe it's not.
Okay. I don't think it was, but I feel like he recruited him or he got him or something like that. I'm not too sure, but there was a link with those two.
Yeah.
But he seemed pretty keen to help Thomas without needing too much convincing, and he became a pretty handy ally, which works from a story perspective. And I'm kind of glad they didn't tease that out. But it does leave me with a lot of questions about Jeremy and where it all kind of fits in. And because if he is, the son or close contact to one of the guys who's in charge of this island, it didn't seem like he had any intention of wanting to be there or stay there, which then it doesn't really add up. But I'm a bit confused with him.
Yeah, I had him and Jeremy and is it Fionn?
Yeah.
Fionn, yeah, his girlfriend. I had them almost together, because I felt like on screen they needed someone in this community that wanted an out. They needed someone that wanted to escape. And to me, that these two are those characters that you couldn't just have a whole community of everyone just following the rules or accepting of where it is and not wanting to escape this community. So I felt, I thought that they were important in that they were there to give Thomas someone to bounce off and give someone to ally with, so that he, like you mentioned, working together, that they were a good little team. And just sort of gave in little reasons and more explanations as to, and this is more obviously the child that they were going to have, of things that aren't going to work on this cursed land. So that was more how I saw them, I guess.
Yeah, true. Real plot-driven characters, aren't they? They make the story work.
Yeah. I had Andrea down as well, just as another character that I thought it was interesting, that she came across as like this support person, and she supports Fionn when she finds out that she's having a child. She supports Thomas when he's injured. She looks out for Jennifer when Jennifer's put out in the middle of the street and, kids are harassing her and things like that. So I thought it was nice to see that. I think it would have been very detrimental for the film if you have this whole cast of characters that belong to this cult or this faction that, and the only thing you see from them are vengeful tactics or negative types of things. So it was really nice to see a character that would go out of the way to do some positive things. Yeah.
Good call. Yeah, she seemed a lot more street smart and worldly than everybody else. And again, was there a conversation with her and Thomas that kind of, I feel like she was back on the mainland at some point, and so she's across how the world works a little bit more than ever. I don't know. There was something she felt again like she didn't fit in, but I felt like it was because she knew how things are supposed to work, and things are a little bit off in this place. So I'm not sure again if I missed something or it was just assumed, and we're supposed to think that she has spent a fair bit of time on the mainland.
Any other characters you wanted to talk about?
Well, I've got Quinn. So who turns out to be the main villain. So is a character. So his character comes pretty hard in the part of the story that makes the film obviously jump off the page, but it's also probably the reason why I lost a bit of interest in the film as well. And not because of his sort of homicidal brutality or his psychopathic thirst to resolve everything wrong in his life with violence, but the fact that this story kind of lost its eeriness of this misunderstood religious cult to this kill first loony gaining power and prominence in the community. That's kind of been done before. The soft and calculated touch of the long-term leader becomes overthrown by a man who's willing to kill to protect. And it never ends well for that man. So inevitably the film started to show its colors of how it was going to end really early, because you knew that Quinn, when he took any sort of power, it wasn't going to end well for him. He was going to get overthrown and probably die a bad death. And so that his character, which felt cliche, felt like it had been done before, to me also represented the point of the story where I kind of, got not lost, but like lost interest a little bit, which is a bit of a shame. So I don't know. I wish they didn't go down that route, but I get it.
Yeah, it reminded me of Aladdin, and when Jafar at the end gets control of the genie. It was like you've got this guy who's a villain the whole time, and then all of a sudden he's got these super villainous powers that he wants to go out of his way to cause as much havoc as possible, for no like that screw corkscrew thing that we were talking about before. I like, obviously that's some sort of ritual that they do, but I was like, we haven't seen that before, and for him to be the one that brings it out, I was like, this is a little bit extreme.
With no trial.
And I couldn't imagine Malcolm doing that. Like, and obviously they've got the guys on the last side, so obviously the leader doesn't usually do it, but it was just like, he's taken on this persona that's all of a sudden, I'm going to do everything how I want to do it and do it myself.
And this part of the movie was important, right? Gareth Evans wanted to make a movie with this part of it in it, and it doesn't work without the character of Quinn. So I get that. That's his prerogative, right? So I'm not disappointed at that. I would have been more appealed with a different part of the story. But anyway, that's for me to be annoyed at.
Is that a good segue into Gareth Evans?
Sure, I
think we might move into, like, so you mentioned before, Welsh director. I did a little bit of a read up on his previous films. Very interesting little backstory that he got obsessed with this sort of Indonesian type of martial arts, and then studied it so in depth, and he's made, I think, 3 Indonesian films that are like action films. I think they're called the Raid series, and really popular, and sort of got his name going, which I thought was a cool little backstory and very different from what we see here. Although we do see a lot of gore in this, but it's a cool little story.
He seems like an interesting dude, and he's I would like. He seems like the kind of guy you'd want to have a beer with and pick his brain a little bit, because he thinks outside the box, but he's got pretty he's got pretty well-formed ideas about what interests him and what he wants to do. So yeah, I'm intrigued by Gareth Evans, and The Raid, not a film that I'd say our former co-host Heater, who the three of us used to do this podcast together, watched The Raid recently. And remember, he hit us up and he said, "Hey, it's been a while, but I watched The Raid," and I was like, never heard of it. And then all of a sudden this comes up. So it's obviously got some sort of following, and we know Heater's a big action fan. So he's obviously doing some right things, Gareth Evans, and I'm intrigued to see what he does next.
Good. Okay. Well, this is where we move on to look at some scenes from the film, and we start off with ones that stood out. So, what are some ones you liked for this, MJ?
There's a real theme in the three scenes that I'm going to mention here, and it's all to do with the horror elements and the intrigue that was built for me through these three scenes. And one of them was immediately at the start with the red mark on the ticket for the boat. For no other reason than I like the way that this was captured and the way we kind of followed through with the swap of the ticket, and then we kind of kept a really close eye on that character who ended up having that ticket. It just was really intriguing because we had no other information, and obviously and Thomas had no other information either. But it just made you really take notice of what's actually happening because something's a bit off, and I think that was a really nice way to set everything up.
Yeah, and with the suitcase, the marking on the suitcase, it was just it made you pay attention and sit up and be like, what's going on here? So I agree.
Yeah, they set that mystery up really quickly, which was good. So the scene not too long into the film as well, when he sneaks back to his room late. Obviously, you see all the blood jars on the floor, but you also see this spirit thing, which ended up being that godlike creature that we see in the film. And when you saw her for the first time at the end of the hallway, which he didn't see, that really excited me because I knew there was this supernatural component to this film, which I wasn't too sure whether that was going to be the case when it was going into this religious cult. And then obviously you see all the blood jars, and then the blood sort of seeps down the crack, and there's something under there, drinking the blood. It was giving me all these little pieces to get really excited about. So again, just setting up that intrigue and that horror element to it that got me very excited. And then the final scene, which is really on trend with this as well, but happened a bit later on, is when Thomas goes into that, I guess like a blood pit of water. And then the old lady pops up and sort of starts chasing him. And that was insane. That really got the blood pumping, and it kind of changed the tone a little bit, where it was began becoming like he was becoming a bit of a recluse. Now trying to catch him, and then no, we've still got these supernatural elements to it, and that was really, really well captured. Really good scene. So they're the things that stuck out for me.
Yeah, I also had that tunnel scene. It was just it was freaky. I was just watching.
Wasn't it?
What else was in? Was there like a chicken or something in that water too? There was something else in the water that was living. It was weird.
Yeah, there was. And then and then I wasn't sure if they were just corpses, and then all of a sudden she just pops out. That's great.
It was a good scene. The opening, and you mentioned this earlier, like some of the way that this was filmed was really cool. Like that opening scene across the water with the camera going across, it reminded me of like the openings of Harry Potter films when they head towards Hogwarts and stuff. And I thought that was really cool.
I need to mention this actually. I forgot to mention. So I recently upgraded my Netflix to the top package where you can watch Ultra HD because I've got a 4K TV, and I hadn't actually done anything about it. And I thought, you can change your Netflix subscriptions every month, so if I don't get any value out of it. So this was the first Ultra HD movie that I watched, and that scene with a train going over the water, and that was like the first main scene where I could see it, really strut its stuff, looked incredible on the big screen with the Ultra HD. So I did want to mention that.
Yeah, very cool. There's the scene where, and it was very obvious that nothing was going to happen to Thomas, but I thought the tension was really good, where they're trying to find this assassin or this intruder, and what's his name, Malcolm, the prophet, sort of lines all the new people up in the church and starts off with a verse of the religious text and tries to get them all to follow on. I just thought that was really well done, just to create that tension of what's going to happen here.
I was very close to putting that scene in, Jesse.
Yeah.
Good call.
And then finally, the other thing that I'd wanted to touch on was that retelling of Thomas in Peking when he was, he was branded with that crucifix on his back. I just thought the camera work there, it sort of did like a loop. It was really cool, just leading into that fire and the burning cross and things like that. It just it looked really, really cool. So that's me. I'm done with the things that I thought looked really nice.
Yeah.
What are some things that you didn't like?
I'll say this first because that scene that you just spoke about, I had it in the scenes that I didn't like. Not because of the way that everything that you've spoken about it. I just felt like it didn't really have the reveal that I think that I wanted about his character. It didn't unlock enough about him because they did create this mystery to him, and I was like, okay, so he'd been burnt by religion before. That was kind of the crux of the scene. You're right, it looked cool. Everything about it was pretty cool, but didn't give me the answers that I wanted for the character. So I will just say that now as
Yeah,
to
I
why
think
I didn't respond as well to it.
I agree that I think, yeah, the payoff wasn't good enough because you had seen those scars on his back before, and you possibly thought it was something he'd woken up with when he arrived at this place. So that in the back of your mind, you're thinking, oh, what's happening here? And yeah, I agree. I think the payoff wasn't fantastic.
Yeah. So a couple of other scenes I did have. I almost took this off my scenes I didn't like because I get why they put it there, but I just don't know if I needed to see that dying lamb born. No, I get it because you're sort of setting up some of the, as I said, the torture porn that we're going to see. It just gives you a bit of a flavor of it, and also it shows you that their crops are dying, their animals aren't producing. So I get the point of it. I just don't know if I needed to see it. So I've left it in there.
It's pretty gross.
It was. There was a scene at the dance when they had the dance before he sort of snuck under the house and went into the tunnel. When him and Andrea had a bit of a romantic little connection where there's a lot of dialogue, and every now and then I'll pick out a line of dialogue that I just thought was awful. And this is one where, out of the blue, she just goes, "Your eyes, they've seen things." it's just a bit much for me. I liked Andrea as a character, and it just felt like almost she was like, "Do I have to say this? Like this is not my character." It was just, it was a bit off for me. So, and then I just, again, I kind of feel bad putting this in, but how much did we really need, Jeremy's corkscrew scene? Just because I just don't know how much it added to the story. And this is what I'm talking about with the stuff the graphic stuff that was put in. It was there for the sake of being there as opposed to telling a story that I thought they were going to tell. And obviously that shit was really hard to swallow, but it all culminated with it all getting a little bit silly with Quinn, the crazy guy, taking control. And I had no reason to think that the people would follow him. There was nothing to suggest that they were crazy enough to be like, oh yeah, this guy's making some sense. And obviously Malcolm losing this political faith that he had, and then Frank, who was the rational guy all along, just going nuts with everything. Like it all just kind of got a bit silly for me. And that's not necessarily the graphicness of seeing a guy brain corkscrewed and killed in that fashion, but more that just it all sort of came together poorly in that little bit. So
yeah, fair enough.
It's all kind of one big scene and one big mess there. But the only other thing I did want to mention was Thomas's lack of awareness when trying to save his sister. And he finally cuts her down and gets her out, and he just doesn't think to, let's just quickly get you out of here. I'll survey my surroundings one more time just to make sure no one's coming up. That was annoying. He could have done a hell of a lot of a better job there, so it bothered me.
Yeah, good. Yeah, at the end, like this is probably the lead into those scenes that sort of frustrated you at the end was when Jeremy goes into the house to talk to Theon to say, I'm ready to escape. And I think it might have been last week's episode or the week before where you're like, these setups where the characters are going to die, and this was just such like you knew something bad was going to happen to him. You didn't go in and tell your pregnant partner, let's escape, let's get away. It's like you're not going to get to escape. It's not going to happen, and that really annoyed
Such
me.
A good point.
That really annoyed me. But other than that, that's all I've got for things that I didn't really like. But
what a way for her to go though.
Yeah, I reckon that was horrible. Time for us to lead into what's this film saying. What are some ideas? What have you got for this, MJ?
I think first and foremost, I think this film works cinematically as this kind of folk horror, like as I said before, the torture porn elements. This part of what they're trying to do in a film works really well portrayed. Thematically, I'm not talking about it thematically, but I think it's worth mentioning that he's tried to make a film that sets a certain tone, creates a certain mood, and it's been ticked off perfectly. So that's worth mentioning. Thematically, I think there's a lot to talk about in terms of the idea of faith, and even conformity as well. It's making sure that you aren't just following someone because they believe it's true and they've connected with it. You kind of need to make your own decisions based off what you've understood. And I feel like everyone in this community would have reasons to be apprehensive about how successful this life on this community or life on this island is going to be. just based on the fact that one guy has had this connection with this godly being. And I don't know, it felt like there was a little bit of a, what are you doing there? And then I think, what's his name? Jeremy mentions that people have tried to leave the island before and been killed, and like that kind of community faith stuff, cult, it's all kind of negatively portrayed in that sense.
Yeah, exactly what you're talking about with that idea of faith, and they set this off at the start where you've got that lamb on the boat and it's rejected, and you got these ideas of blood being this cleansing sort of idea, and you mentioned this too. Who decides who's a prophet, who should we follow? And pain and suffering is felt through faith, and they led into this idea of resurrection of this character of Thomas too. So this whole idea of his character being able to grow and regain faith in something, and obviously that was in his sister and in Andrea. Freedom too was a big thing in this, and the idea that of escape, and whether you're tied up physically like Jennifer, or whether you're metaphorically like the young couple, that you can't escape this island, like this idea of being able to escape cults. And obviously this happens in real life too. There are people that get stuck in these situations, and there's desperation of needing to stay alive, and can we keep these crops going? Can we keep this island going? And does this depend on the faith? Is it this big circle, this big cycle? And I ripped this off the interview with the director, where he said, the idea of this film was about cycles. He said, cycles of violence and political perversion throughout history. It's a fact that the human race can't escape these cycles of these things happening. And I thought that was an interesting insight into the mind of the creator of the film, and the idea too. So, yeah.
Well, that's obviously the crux of the story he's trying to tell.
Yeah. All right. Well, what did we take away from this one?
Look, to me, it is going to be a story that never got to where I thought it was going, or hoped it was going to get to. And the big shift of pace for that third act, some of the more brutal, torturous, and even gory scenes will stay with me, for better or worse. There's those scenes in the later Saw films that just stick with you because they stick with you, and it's not dissimilar to that. But I think there's definitely some people that I could recommend this film to, more the torture porn fans and the folk horror. I think the folk horror fans will be left wanting a little bit, but then maybe that's just me because I'm kind of into that stuff and I was left wanting a little bit. So I think there's enough here for an audience, and I guess those ratings we spoke about at the start back that up.
Good. Yeah, very, very violent. This is something that's definitely not for children. So
oh God, no.
This is sort of like, I had this in the questions anyway, so I might talk about it now. But who's the target audience for this? Like, Netflix is so accessible to anyone. Like, there are teenage kids who don't have the child restrictions and can watch anything, and that's possibly a little bit of a concern with Netflix, is that I can jump on and watch Kill Bill whoever I am whenever I want, and we don't have that type of regulation at times. So this one sort of concerns me, that some of this graphic violence could be accessed by people like, oh, horror film, it's only MA. Like, Netflix have given it an MA rating. It's a little bit of a concern for me. So yeah, I don't know.
Okay. I think there's definitely a clear audience, but you're right though. There's a clear audience for this once I've watched the film. Prior to watching the film, I didn't know any of this stuff. So I guess, and MA, I got no issue with it being MA 15 plus. Like, again, if you're 15 years old, you can. I reckon I saw Saw when I was, probably that age. You can swallow it. Again, it's not going to be easy for you, but if you're not into that kind of stuff, like if you think you're just watching this creepy horror film and you cop all this, you'd be like, holy shit, where'd that come from? Not what I signed up for. But there's definitely a clear audience for it, a horror audience, a sort of gory audience. It's there.
Yeah, good point. I think you've got that from me, because I think I'm turning into a grumpy old man, because like you mentioned, I think I was in like year 9 when I went and saw in the cinemas too, and it's probably along the same line. So yeah, I don't know. I don't know who I'm trying to protect anyway, so it doesn't matter. IMDb, did you jump on to check any cast in this one out?
I did. I jumped on firstly for Dan Stevens. So he's the Beast from Beauty and the Beast, which I'm sure you knew this going into it. And obviously you're a big Disney man, but as soon as I saw that, I was like, oh yeah, perfect. Yeah, that's him. I could see it, even though he's like a beast in most of the movie, but you can still tell. Yeah. And the second one I jumped on for, which I did know, but I just double checked that Bill Milner was the lead from iBoy, which we covered on this podcast. But I was pretty sure it was him anyway. He's grown up a little bit though.
Yeah, well, that leads into mine because when I read the cast out at the preview of our last episode, I was like, Bill Milner, I have read that name out before.
Yes.
Couldn't click where or who or what it was from. And then when I looked it up, I was like, it's the kid from iBoy. But the other thing I looked up, and this is a really good Flix Forum Netflix connection, Fionn. Did you check out? Do you remember her at all?
Fionn, the young girl.
Young girl, yeah. So played by Kristine Froseth. She's Veronica from Sierra Burgess. She's the blonde chick whose mum's really obese.
Oh my god!
Yeah, I couldn't believe it. I was like, it's a double whammy. There's two.
Wow.
Yeah,
I didn't recognize her at all.
Yeah, I was like, I've seen you in something. What are you from? And then I was like, oh my god, you're the cheerleader type person who tries to make Sierra cool. So anyway,
do you know another good one with the Flix Forum link?
Yeah,
Andrea is Polly from Pretty Little Thing That Lives in the House.
Oh,
so she's like the initial like spirit thing that got killed back in like the 800s. Yeah, that was Andrea.
Cool. Well, we've got there's 3 episodes of ours you could go back and check out now if you wanted to know what we're talking about. We covered iBoy, we've covered Sierra Burgess is a loser, and the pretty thing that lives in the house. So check those 3 episodes out. Okay, question time. Have you got any questions you'd like to ask me?
2. So again, not one that you can answer, but how did everyone get to this island or within this community in the first place? Do they have ads around? Do they advertise? Like, how'd they get there?
They did answer that, didn't they? There was a shipwreck or something, and the three main guys was like,
I know how they got there initially, but how do they like get people coming? Like because people are coming on a boat and like doing like classes before they get there. How do they get them?
I guess it's like how any cult works. You have a few leaders that have manipulative ways to get people to do what they want.
Yeah, I'll give you that.
Yeah.
The only other question I have, who was the murderous sidekick with like a beehive head?
Okay, so I've got that here too. I said, so his character's name was the Grinder. Is that who we're talking about? Yeah. So his actual name is the Grinder. Yeah. So his role was literally to grind dead bodies up to feed to the goddess.
Okay.
But yeah, I had the same question. I was like, what did he actually add as a character? Like we saw Malcolm and everyone else giving the goddess blood anyway, so we probably didn't need an extra person to fight with Thomas and that anyway.
Well, I guess he was around possibly before that whole community arrived, and that was his purpose in life was to make sure that the goddess got blood or something. But he just kind of came in. He was kind of like in the background, and all of a sudden he just became this massively important player who was the real thorn in their side. And I was like, we kind of haven't explored this bloke so much, and he's pretty interesting.
Yeah, good point. I liked that one. Were you scared at all? Were there any times where you got scared?
The closest was in the pit, in the blood pit where she popped out. That was a good scare though, yeah. But I was I wasn't expecting to be apprehensive. I don't know. I think I thought this was going to be more of a thriller anyway. But no, it didn't. It wasn't particularly scary.
Good. Can looking at your vagina in a hand mirror tell you if you're pregnant or
not? Look, you're asking the wrong person, but I got to assume there's some sort of truth or wives' tale to that.
I can imagine if you're like in the late stages of pregnancy and you maybe in labor and you're checking to see if the baby's crowning, but I don't think she was quite at that stage yet. So yeah, if anyone
maybe it
knows
looks different though. Maybe it does look a little bit different. I don't know. Maybe she had to look at it beforehand, so she knew what she was looking for. But I don't know, mate. That's a good question that I am not equipped to answer.
Good. So this might tie in and give us an answer as to that corkscrew scene. So at the start, there's the ransom letter that they get, and there's that flower in the ransom letter when he's reading it on the train. Then they put that same flower in Jeremy's brain after they've corkscrewed him. So what does that flower symbolize? There's got to be some reason to it for it to appear, but I don't know. That's why I'm asking you. You might not know either, but.
It's a really interesting point that I hadn't considered. I think I put the pieces together in my head and then left it there. But look, it's got to be because there's something to do with the fact that when the goddess is healthy and firing that all the crops
are growing. Yep.
all the leaves are green. So maybe it's an example of this is our sacrifice that we're making to get the crops better, so we can give you blood.
Yep.
I don't know. Maybe it's something to do with the sacrifice.
I'll take that. Good. Thomas, did he actually take ransom money with him to the island? And if so, what happened to it?
Yeah, because the guy said to him at the start, like, make sure you don't pay the full ransom.
Yeah.
I think he said the full ransom. I think there was a level of negotiation there. I don't know. Yeah, maybe not. Obviously not, because I never found it, and he wouldn't have just had it on him the whole time.
And they happened to find the map of the outlay.
Yeah.
So yeah. Last one. So that goddess, every time that we physically see her in that den, she's tied up quite heavily by the roots of the tree. So how did she get out into the hallway, and how did she? Is it just a vision? How'd she get into the water underneath? That little stream of dirty water.
Yeah, is it like a spiritual thing?
Yeah.
That she projects her spirit there as opposed to her physical being? Because she also, every time you saw her on the seat, she wasn't in great health to be walking around and doing all this kind of stuff. So I think it was some sort of spiritual projection.
Good. I like that. Okay. I think it's time to wrap this one up. So this is at the end of the show, we give the film a rating out of 5 stars for a Flicks From average. So MJ, what have you saying?
Yeah, like, as I've said, this movie certainly does jump out of the page. And whilst the third act was probably the most memorable, it probably, when it wandered into the more torture porn stakes, it probably left me a little bit unfulfilled from the eeriness of the supernatural cult village feel that had been building. Nonetheless, it did have enough to keep me intrigued, and eventually my attention for the majority of it's probably slightly overplayed runtime. But I was pretty interested from start to finish. So it's 2.5 stars for me.
Nice. Yeah, I mean, if they're laying this out as a horror, like, it didn't scare me, and it was very unsettling for me though. So I'll give it that. And these cult-like situations, they always creep me out a bit. So I appreciate that. And I think the effort that was put into the costumes, the sets, the cinematography, I thought was really, really good. And I did like this journey of Thomas. And we probably didn't even, talk about it too much with that final scene where, he's sucked back into the ground and he continues on as this sort of protector of the island, I guess. But so I'm giving it a 3.5 out of 5. Because I did enjoy that story of Thomas. I think is that redemption, or that he's reborn. He's got a different purpose in life now. He's found himself.
Can you talk to me about the alternative ending that you alluded to earlier?
Yeah, so based on what I was reading, so that final scene we've got, gives us a Flicks From average of 3 out of 5 as our show's average. But the final scene, from what I can gather, was that so at the end, Thomas, and I'm glad, I should say I'm glad, because I was a bit worried that Malcolm wasn't going to get any closure. So I'm glad that they had Malcolm walk out onto that cliff where Thomas has said goodbye to his sister, to Andrea, and they've gone off to freedom. And, we see the cliffs falling apart and turning into fire, and he's sort of, he's bleeding. So this blood's going back into the ground and allowing the shoots to reborn, and the island's coming back alive, and he's sort of sinking into the ground and taking over this role of the goddess, because he's obviously burnt her. So this is that idea of that theme that they had, or that Gareth Evans spoke about, with this cycle. So it's almost like this cycle is starting again on this island. So from what I can gather from what he was saying, was that the ending was going to be a lot darker, where Thomas makes this decision just before he's sucked into the ground, not wanting this cycle to continue, not wanting life to continue. And therefore, I'm not sure how it was going to happen, whether he was going to take his own life or whatever it was. But I think there was going to be some sort of decision that he made that this cycle didn't continue, so that island was annihilated.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah,
I think I would have preferred that.
Yeah, so I think that it was hard taking that context just from this little snippet of an interview, but that's the impression that I got from it, which I thought was quite interesting.
It's interesting. As I said, he's got an interesting mind, Dan Stevens. Not Dan Stevens, Gareth Evans. I'm intrigued.
Yeah, good. Okay, well, we're on social media. We've got Twitter, we've got Facebook, Instagram. Pop a question up for the week. And the question I had was, what false prophets do you have in your life? Are there any false prophets that you... it's a very personal question, so I don't feel like you need to answer it.
Also, do a lot of people not know that they're false prophets right now, and maybe ask them in 10 years' time?
Possibly like, LeBron James. He's definitely a false prophet. Oh
Oh,
god.
bugger off.
I know, I was just thinking of like, just idolizing, celebrities and sports people and
I
things
know,
like
but just
that.
think about what we've just watched and the false prophets within that, and you're comparing it to an athlete who has been pretty damn commendable his whole career.
I think that's my first LeBron comment on this podcast, so I don't know how to say that.
LeBron, if you're listening, we certainly don't think of you like that. Please continue to do what you're doing because you are entertaining the whole world, and I love you.
Okay, no comment from me. Let's move on to next week. We are back and rolling with another film, and this sort of segues in from our director this week, who has an influence on the Indonesian market, because we have our first Indonesian film next week.
All
It's,
right.
the 2018 Indonesian action thriller. It's called The Night Comes for Us. It's directed by Tomo Giganto, and it stars Joe Taslin, Iko Uwais, Julie Estelle, Sunny Pang, and Zach Lee. So,
Cool.
yeah, a foreign action thriller, which will be exciting.
Yeah, no, that sounds good.
Well, thank you for that, chat. That was I think an interesting sort of film that, it's hard to, like I mentioned at the start, hard to take out exactly what to take out of that.
I don't know how I would have felt if I didn't get a chance to talk about this film. I don't think this is a film that you just pop on midweek, watch, and then just forget about. I think a debrief of some sorts is required, so I appreciate us doing that.
Yeah, that reminds me of like when I watched Midsommar. I was like, I need to talk to someone about this because I can't just sit here and take that in. So I think similar sort of how I felt after watching that film. Yeah, good.
It did have a bit of Midsommar about it. I was thinking that throughout. Didn't quite go in the same direction, but a lot of similarities.
Definitely. Yeah, a little community. But that's been a good chat, and I'm looking forward to seeing you next week.
Looking forward to it, mate. I'll see you then.